right, everybody. Welcome back to Resiliency Rounds. This is Resiliency Rounds with Jeremy and Anish. And where we left off last time was Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Book 2. We went halfway through it. I would say three-fourths of the way through it. And now we're going to finish Book 2 today. And before we start off on our journey to complete book two, I just wanted to give a little bit of a prelude as to what are we doing here and how far along have we come. And so I would like to start maybe when we started this podcast many years ago, both it was with my dear friend Eddie and me, and we did it as physicians. At that time, we were feeling ourselves that there was a misalignment, if you may, between what we felt about our profession and about our lives and how the practice of medicine was unfolding in front of our eyes. And we were also right at that stage in life where you come upon big existential questions and you ask yourself, are you happy? Or what even is happiness? And we initially fairly quickly understood that these questions are not necessarily specific to physicians, but since we were physicians, we started in that realm. And hence the name Resiliency Rounds. A lot of our early podcasts allude to medicine. I'm a cardiologist, and Eddie is a urogynecologist, and she's a surgeon. And so we had a lot of anecdotes that necessarily came from medicine. However, very quickly, we understood that this is more just of a philosophical journey of any human, any rational being. And along the way, we took I wouldn't say a detour, but not a detour at all. As a matter of fact, it was we came upon a syllabus, a curriculum of the U.S. Naval War College, and that was called the Foundations of Moral Obligation course, which actually fit really well with what we were trying to do before we came upon the curriculum. Before we came upon the curriculum, we were taking up Mortimer Adler's challenge about going through about 54 books that form the Western canon of thought. And it was an arduous task. We started on it, and it was difficult to complete it. And so the Foundations of Moral Obligation course was a distilled version of that, and it had other elements to it. It also had Eastern thought, which I particularly took realized very quickly that the Eastern and the Western line of thought come together, and there was this that humans, no matter which side they're on or what culture they belong to, they all come upon certain truths. And so it's a very nice mix of both the Foundations of Moral Obligation. And the reason to participate in the Foundations of Moral Obligation course, or the Great Conversation, or the Eastern and Western philosophy, is because we want to build inside of us a toolkit that allows us to make decisions when it matters most. And it usually matters most when there is decisions to be made between good and evil, right and wrong, and not just at a personal level, but in a larger playing field. And the larger that playing field gets, the more the consequences of these decisions, and the deep and more varied and more broad one's toolkit needs to be in order to participate. And so this has become a way to create a toolkit, to add more tools to that toolkit. And when we say toolkit, we're talking about a philosophical toolkit. And so we started on the journey with the Platonic dialogues, which form the backbone of the Western line of thought, and we finished the Platonic dialogues that were recommended. There are a lot more Platonic dialogues that we haven't focused on or haven't discussed in the podcast, but we rounded off the Platonic dialogues with the Republic, and then moved on to Aristotle. And in the Aristotelian works, which are a little bit dry compared to the Platonic dialogues, because this is a lecture series that was delivered by Aristotle to princes and other nobility in a way to kind of learn philosophy and sciences. And so it's a bit dry. And then along the way, Jeremy joined, and Eddie has taken a bit of a break, and so Jeremy has been my partner here in continuing the conversation, the great conversation. And so that's where we are at. We are at the Nicomachean ethics, and that's journey of how we got here. And just a bit of a prelude regarding the Aristotelian Nicomachean Ethics Book 2. It is about the virtuous agent. How does one start participating in virtue and walk the path of virtue so that one can be on the path to happiness? The virtuous agent should be knowledgeable, should have choice, and the actions that they perform should be done without secondary gain. And there was and it should be done consistently. It cannot be done just once in a while. And so those kind of actions are what's called virtuous action, and they qualify one as a virtuous agent. And as you're walking down this path of virtue, it's a direction. You never achieve your goal, but that path is a path that leads to happiness. And along the way, a virtuous agent needs to understand where virtue is, and virtue lies somewhere in the middle of two extremes. So that's what brings book two to a conclusion. So I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy now to see what his thoughts were regarding this concept of the mean and virtue, and then if he has any other thoughts about what I just discussed. And Jeremy, feel free to talk about your journey as well, and how our paths have come together.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Anish. Yeah, it's the mean is something actually that I spent this week thinking about quite a bit, and in my own personal life and experience. So, um, you know, the, there are extremes, right? And so, living virtuously is somewhere in the middle. And to what your point where, we would never actually reach there, right? So it it requires constant work, and I think you're constantly moving the needle. And so what was interesting this week is, so some of how I spend my time. For years I've been donating money to different charities. I rescue dogs. I do things where I'm on the board of a nonprofit. I've been on two boards of nonprofits over the years, and that's me thinking that, all right, that's me living virtuously. But then these are things that are kind of hands off. Donating money is hands off. So I'm thinking about the mean and saying, well, I might be living somewhere in there in terms of generosity, if we're using generosity as a virtue. But I haven't reached, because I'll never reach it. But so how do I actually become more generous? And my wife this week was going to a local shelter program that lifts people up. It houses families. It gives them job training, gives them food. It gives them all the resources they need to go out and be successful and independent. And you move through the program and eventually are living on your own. But every Monday they have people come and people make homemade meals and serve. I think there were 27 you know members there this week, and I had a decision that I could make, which is, she asked me to go, and I choose to go or not to go, and I could make up lots of excuses on why not to go.
Right.
Um, and the reality is, well, if we're talking about being virtuous, and how do I increase, whatever my end goal is, and it's actually by doing more action, by taking action.
Absolutely.
And so I chose to do it. And now that doesn't make me more virtuous. That was a one-time event, right? And so as we're talking about this chapter of book two, we're talking too about, like, just because you do it once doesn't mean that it makes you virtuous. It's
Ah,
the act of doing it over and over and over again, because you can. It's that choice you're making, but it's also becomes more of a habit. It's that consistency you talked about. It's the knowledge that, yeah, I know I'm doing this, and I have a choice to do it, and I'm going to do it consistently,
yep.
instead of doing it one time and say, well, I'm a good person. So that's my recent reflection this week on virtue. And and it's not exactly living in the mean because our goalpost constantly is moving. So I haven't given you examples of like extremes on the mean,
Right.
but I know that even within the mean, wherever I am, I'm not there. I haven't arrived. So I'm somewhere, maybe to the left or to the right of wherever wherever I fall.
So yeah, so let's find out, Jeremy, if you met all the criteria for a virtuous agent. So one is knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we say knowledge, it is not just knowledge of the act that you're committing. It is also the knowledge that performing the act, even though in the short term may not be pleasurable,
Mm-hmm.
puts you on the path to good action. And if you were to string many such acts together for the rest of your life, would would increase your likelihood of achieving eudaimonia. So yes, so that's the knowledge. One is the knowledge part of it. The other part of the knowledge is participating in an act that does not in the end turn out to be not a good act. You see, that is a little bit harder to do because one doesn't know if the acts that one is doing, can you follow them for eternity and see if there is a good or a bad result that comes out of it. And I think that one is a bit harder to do than the former one because, and you also have to be a bit practical about it. Like Aristotle talks about this. You don't want to get into too many specifics and you also want to be a little bit general. So, yes, going out there and feeding or housing or teaching or educating someone who is who's doesn't have the same good fortune as us is a good act, and one doesn't have to see who these people are and what's going to happen, and so on and so forth. So there we go. So that is knowledge. Second is choice, and I think that's a good point to kind of spend a little bit of time about because you had the opportunity to not go, but you also understood that not going strays you away from the path,
Right.
and so you made the decision voluntarily. You understood the two or the three or four different options you had, and you understood which each of them point, and you realized this one going is probably closest. And then comes secondary gain. Now, we've discussed this in detail last time because there is always gain. We are doing all of this selfishly so that we are on the path to happiness. We're walking the good path. But of all the gains that one can have, that's the best kind of secondary gain. The gain in which you do something for yourself, but what you get in return is common good. It participates in the common good. The only thing you're getting back in return is the fact that you followed the path of right action. That's the secondary gain is not with money. You didn't go there so that, you would make money, number one, obviously. Secondly, you didn't go there because you would be recognized in the local paper and then you could stand for elections. Yeah,
All right.
see what I mean? So that's secondary gain. But you're right in pointing out that the last point there is consistency. Now, if you do it just once, or you happen to just do it, and because you found yourself in a position where you could do it, and you never again come upon that thing, well, that doesn't necessarily make it good action. But then, consistency is also not doing the same action over and over again. Consistency is finding yourself on the path again and again.
Mhm.
You see, so this is one example. But if you trace your steps back, I mean, you were participating in not for profits. You rescued dogs. You did all those things, and so all of those times are when you found yourself on the path and you stepped off at other points, found yourself back again. But you're going in that direction, and that's finding the mean. Now, this really doesn't give a good example of finding the mean, but what it does is it tells you that the path is actually not a straight path. Maybe the path is straight, but when we find it at different points, we keep intersecting it. But the thing is, again, like when we said that it's not being on the path, it's going in the direction. The right action or the right path or the virtuous action. When we say virtue, virtue has these weird connotations, but we are talking about virtue as in the Hellenistic virtues, that's just justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom. You're trying to walk in that path, and it's a direction. You're walking that direction. You find yourself off of it, you find yourself on it, but eventually, the better you get, the more you do it, the consistency, if the more and more such things you string together, the more you find yourself on the true path. So I'd say, based on what I've heard, that you were or you are an ethical agent. Now, you could always choose to step off of that
Right. At any
at
point in
any
time.
point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's excellent. I love your
Right.
example.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So virtue then, he says this, that the thing that we gotta realize is that virtuous acts are hard.
Right.
Good path is the hard path. The right action is the hard action. It is and it is not easy to call oneself good or right or virtuous. As a matter of fact, we find ourselves doing that. We need to realize that we are leading ourselves astray, because for men who are good, he says, men who are good, or men or women in this case, humans who are good in but one way. Being good, you're good in but one way. I mean, in that good is a capital G good. You're capital G good if you're following the path of right action, good action, virtuous action, and in on the path of happiness. That's what qualifies one as good. But one can be bad in many multitudinous ways. You see?
Right.
And so for all of us, most of the times we are not on the right path. We are not, even mindless tasks, indifferent, which don't lead to bad or good, are not necessarily good acts. It gets very hard to do the right thing. Even if you do, even, and you could be as strict with yourself as you want, but even if you're sitting there and watching Netflix and eating popcorn, like it doesn't necessarily hurt anybody. It's neither good nor bad.
Right.
But guess what? You're not on the path of virtue. You cannot. Now, I'm not saying that Socrates never took a day off. He did. Obviously, he did things that were pleasurable too. But my point is that that's why being good, there's only one way of being good.
Right.
You're either doing that or not.
Yeah. So so along those lines, people like Socrates, Nietzsche, a cardiologist, are there paths to choose that keep you more on that on the path towards goodness? Is that towards the big G, capital G? Is that the because you're helping people every day as a choice of profession? Is that something those are that's not something that you're helping those who want it and some probably who don't want it. Um, right? I mean, it's every day is an act of you're doing virtuous acts.
Well, well, now let's ask ourselves that question. It's a great question, Jeremy. So then, um, in order to be able to be called a virtuous agent, one has to still meet all the qualifications, right? So knowledge, right? Now, I happened to become a cardiologist. I didn't, but before I chose to be a cardiologist, I didn't understand the difference between good and evil, in the sense that I wasn't a rational agent. I hadn't understood these concepts. I did it when I was very young. And so I didn't. So if I didn't have the knowledge of good and evil, the path to happiness, I thought the path to happiness is becoming a cardiologist, which has got nothing to do with it.
Right.
I'm sure there was somebody who practiced medicine in the death camps in Nazi Germany, and there were physicians who did it. I know it. We all know that. So that doesn't necessarily make you virtuous. And so it is that the knowledge needs to precede the action, right? I just happen to be a cardiologist who's understood the nature of happiness. As a matter of fact, being a cardiologist, not being a cardiologist, doesn't put you on the path at all. As a matter of fact, one could be anybody. I could have been, as a matter of fact, I believe that one can be um, uh, uneducated and find and have an equal chance to be on the path of happiness.
Absolutely.
It's just that it's an equal chance. Well, but it's easier for us, in the developed world, educated with the Maslow's hierarchy, right? We just have to self-actualize. We've gotten everything else. We are at the 1 yard line. All we just need to make sure we don't fumble the ball.
Mhm.
And I find many people, even myself, many chances to fumble the ball. Right.
Right.
Um, so as a cardiologist, I could have fumbled several times. So knowledge didn't exist before I became a cardiologist. Choice, right? You choose the right action when you understand what the right action is. Without knowledge, there is no choice. It is just chance. So I didn't choose any of this before I understood the path, right? Secondary gain. I had all sorts of secondary gain. I want to be a cardiologist because people say that you're one, and that gives you status, it gives you money, it gives you all of those things. I didn't choose it for virtuous needs, and so I don't know if that's the case.
So you think it was more for feeding ego than it was for a desire to help people going into it? Is that,
Uh, it's a little bit of both, right? Humans are
yeah,
complex.
yeah,
Now, yes, you ask anybody, you read my personal statement or what I wrote when I went into, residency or cardiology. It was all about, helping the common good. I didn't even know what those things meant,
mhm,
but you put it in there just like everybody else does.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm not going to beat myself over it. I was as conventional as anybody else. Yes, I didn't choose to be, dealing in weapons of mass destruction. I chose to be a physician. So obviously there was some help there.
right,
But I could be good. I could be good in one way, but I could be bad in so many other ways, right?
right, yeah,
So I also did many other things that didn't, but yeah, this gave me a better chance to align myself eventually.
yeah. A little bit of a boost, maybe. That's maybe,
Maybe,
yeah,
yeah. But
maybe,
I know a lot of folks and if you practice cardiology in a fee-for-service healthcare system in the US, how much good are you actually doing?
right,
This is
yeah,
one of the reasons why we started resiliency runs because we realized it was moral injury. You are participating in a system that excludes a lot of people. You're participating in a system that is not built for improving outcomes. It's really built for making more money, and those are not the things you signed up for.
right.
Yeah, you signed up to be comfortable in your living, but not at the cost. And you understand the cost later on.
Mhm. That's right.
So yeah, I don't think me being a cardiologist has nothing to do with being a virtuous agent. And even after, as a matter of fact, it's a very complex way of trying to be on the path of good. Because in order to practice cardiology, one has to be in a system, and that system determines the direction and not one. Yeah.
Which is one of my questions today, which was how does culture, right? It could be
Mm,
organizational culture, it could be societal culture, US versus say, Venezuela, Colombia, or
yeah.
Amsterdam, but how does culture impact our individual ability and capacity to become virtuous or to be on that path at least? Yeah.
And that's what Aristotle is contending with here, right? In
Right.
his mind, this is a discussion to be had at a societal level.
Mhm.
And it's important for for leaders to understand the nature of virtue and happiness and then create situations or circumstances where the multitude can then follow in that direction. It, and whether that's the right approach or not is not for us to really discuss. I think time has already taught us whether that's possible or not.
Right.
But the Platonic dialogues focus with more on the individual journey.
Mhm.
It is possible to do this at an individual level, even though that's a very hard ask of a human, but it's possible. It's near impossible for a multitude. We've had many philosopher kings who have failed at the task. I mean, Marcus Aurelius is a great example.
Mhm.
Had all the prerequisites, but his own son turned out to be furthest removed from the path of good or virtue. So,
Right.
but what do you think? I mean, I've gone on and on about this. Do you believe that there are certain folks who are in fact in a better position to be on the path as opposed to others due to their profession?
To their profession. No, I think where I'm landing is this idea of what the word boost that I use I think sits well with me because at the end of the day you can certainly if at a young age you're choosing a profession, are you really doing that because you're not thinking about these type of concepts? You might say, I really enjoy helping people, and so I want to help people, which is that is knowledge at a certain point, right? I mean, that's you have an understanding like this is where I want to go. Not, but again, there's so many different variables that come into there's lots of different virtues too, right? So there's lots of different ways to be virtuous, and
Yep.
I mean, at a young age, I knew that I wanted to help people, right? So I was always a listener. So it was certainly it made sense to go into psychology, but a PhD was not to help people. That was to feed ego. So there was as simple as I wanted to accomplish things. I wanted to be the expert. I wanted to be the achiever. And I needed, I believed I needed a document to do that. I needed the background and the schooling to do that. That wasn't to live on a path of virtue. It was for self, you know, my
Yeah.
own to meet my own needs, whatever those are, to fill whatever void I may have. So, um, and then you find yourself working with people for years who, uh, some people, what I've worked with people who want the help and those who don't. And I think that that's actually fairly that right there is a path of like
Ah.
generosity and courage when
Yeah.
you're working with like an executive who says, I don't need you and you're a waste of my time. And by the way, I know everything that you know, so you're
Yeah.
not going to teach me anything new. And to stay there and to stay that path and say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's explore. Let's explore that. Why do you think that? You have you done all of this before too, and be
Right.
curious about that. But that in and of itself is an act of virtue to sit with those people who actually are not on the path and maybe far from it. And um, yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. The comment that really struck with me is the willingness to sit with someone who do, doesn't understand their own ignorance and is unwilling to learn. Aristotle struck those folks out already. Like he's done. He's like, if you're in that group, don't even bother listening to this stuff. Yeah, that's the hardest group, and that's the problem with dealing with the multitude. See, Aristotle, uh, su- in that making that statement, has already canceled out many folks
Yeah,
who will be in his republic that he is trying to build. The challenge becomes in how to motivate folks who don't realize their own ignorance and are unwilling to learn because of that. And I was in that camp, and that's why I say a lot of the actions that I took before I came upon certain understanding and was was not action in any direction. I was just going in every direction, being pulled hither thither by the winds and the forces of convention, quite
yeah,
frankly.
yeah.
So, and I shouldn't say that I'm completely devoid of convention now. You're right. That's why
Right,
this is
right.
to your point. The one act doesn't define your character. It is several such acts. And so, do you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, well, I'm building off of that is
Uh,
it, it's interesting that all right, so Aristotle wrote them off, and at the same time in book two, he's saying this is difficult.
yeah,
Achieving virtue is difficult, but I'm just going to write all of you over here off because you're not capable of it.
yeah, that's right.
I find that fascinating because that's not that in and of itself. Well, I mean, of course, Aristotle's a man as well, but like we mentioned earlier, like in
Uh,
elitist too, but like, well, that's not very virtuous of you. I mean, that's not,
uh,
I mean, I think patience, like, right. I mean, temperance, self-control, like, well, let me sit
yeah,
with you people, with those of you who I believe are not capable of this, and let me teach you. And on top of that, he's suggesting this at a societal level and
yeah,
bringing politics into this and saying, how do we create a society for this? But you're writing people off at the same
yeah,
time, saying, but not for everyone.
Yeah, I get your point. I think maybe maybe I was a bit maybe I was a bit flippant about that, but I think his I think his approach is more about the fact that if you're in that last cohort, you're not the leader.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're ignorant and unwilling to learn, you're not the leader that he is trying to teach. The one that so that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, that's great. Good
I-
clarification.
yeah, and yes, and by that he's also disqualifying someone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To your point, right? You said which is interesting. I never thought of that, right? Because we think the way one thinks is not the way everyone else thinks. Now, one is born with certain tendencies, and we discussed this, right? Virtue is sometimes based on things that are not in one's control, and so one could tend towards helping others, and that's not a choice. You're not born with that choice; it just happens. Now, you can choose to act on it and choose not to act on it. That's a choice, but it's
Yeah.
contingent free will, and so you had the good fortune of being someone who likes to help people, and you chose to act on that. You chose psychology, and then your life has been a collection of such actions. Now there's someone out there who doesn't have the same underlying underpinning, doesn't believe that helping others is actually a thing to do. Now that person is going to have a harder time of it.
Yeah.
uh, there is something to be said about that too. I believe that, and this comes up later on, if one is, if one tends to have the, what is the, one tends to have the nature to be courageous, to be just, to be temperate, that person has an easier time of it
Yeah.
than someone who does not have the nature. But for the one who does not have the nature, but walks on the path, that is a life well lived.
Yes.
There is more effort required to do it, right? And so there's something to be said about that. And so going back to what Aristotle talks about eudaimonia, having all the things, the looks, the money, the education, the good fortunes, the wherewithal to follow philosophy, to meet challenges, learn from them, and grow, or you have all of those things and you stay on the path and you make it, that is eudaimonia. And some people have a harder time to get on it. Some people have an easier time to be on it. But the harder it is, the more the satisfaction there is. And that's where stoicism, when we talk about stoicism, that's where that comes in. The harder it gets, the better the fruits are.
Yeah. I love that.
So that's, yeah, you made a very good point. So I want to underscore that. Having the ability, not having the ability. So I'm going to move on unless you have something else to add, and then we can go to the means. Do you have
Well,
anything
let's
else?
move on. Yeah.
So he says, virtue then is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean, that is, the mean relative to us, this being determined by a rational principle, and by that principle by which man of practical wisdom would determine it. So Aristotle uses logic in a very weird way to come to answers. So he says, what is right action? Well, right action is the action that a man who is virtuous will perform. Well, who is a virtuous man? Virtuous man performs right action. What is right action? Right action is the action that a virtuous man would perform.
Yeah.
It's
Anish, right there is why 25 years ago I stopped reading philosophy.
I think the what he says is the most of the good stuff is between the big stuff that he says.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why one cannot read philosophy in blurbs. You know, there's no one line in. You have to walk the long, winding path.
Yep. Yep. It is
And
long and winding indeed.
it
Yeah.
is, my friend. Absolutely, absolutely. So what he says is that so first of all, and all of this, this is all a manual. So it says,
Yeah.
how do you know that you are on the right path, right? Well, because if you were a wise man, you would already know, right? Now, I'm not a wise man. I'm starting. How do I know this is the right path? He says the first thing to do is there are certain actions and passions that are wrong. Don't do them. Let's
Mhm.
start there,
Mhm.
right? One doesn't have to be wise to know what is wrong. There's some terrible things that one shouldn't do, right? Now, again, we are not talking about psychopathy. We are talking about neurosis, right? For the most part, you tend to do certain things. We tend in certain directions. We tend usually towards cowardly acts. We tend usually towards lustful acts. We tend usually towards passions and appetites. Of all of those things that are extremes, you know, and those are things that one should not do. And those things, for the most part, are outlined pretty well in any religious text. You find those "thou shalt not," you
Right,
know,
right, yeah,
and there's a reason for that because forget about being on the path of virtue and achieving the common good. Just don't be a terrible human being.
yeah,
Right? Let's start there.
right.
Simple, right? So then he says, once you have figured that out, right? Then let's start talking about how do you now do the things that actually get you on the right path, right? The big number one and most important step is don't be Nero, don't be one of those terrible guys, and don't be Hitler, and then so you don't do those kind of things, and then you'll find yourself that it gives you much improves your chances significantly,
Mhm.
right? Now, obviously, I gave you big examples, but there are lots of other folks. Ignorance, unfortunately, leads to terrible acts as well, and then psychopathy does, which that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about rational individuals. What do you think about that? Have you found that in your life where this is terrible and you can step away from it, and doing that has been well, not even personal experience, but what do you think?
Uh, I think that well, I'll get there in a roundabout way maybe, but uh, the idea of intuition and how we lose touch of intuition at a very early age because we're told no, don't, stop, or so the people around us, our society is telling us what is right and what is wrong, whether that is, but you're ignoring your intuition, which is actually probably going to tell you what is the proper response. And I think as adults, we grab towards trying to fill our needs, our wants, our whatever it is. It's this void or gap that is left from our childhood, and it's because we aren't actually in touch with our intuition.
Yeah.
And I think that intuition, right, is where this comes in. Of does that make sense? How's that
Mm,
resonate with you?
mm. Yes, the intuition is also a tendency. Tendency sometimes is not in our control, but what you are talking about is a different kind of intuition. And there are, I can say that for the most part, we all have it, and we should listen to it. We find ourselves in circumstances, and sometimes out of choice, where we don't listen to our intuition. And even that, listening to the intuition part, you can also train, and also depends upon the feedback that you get and how that makes one feel. It's very important to stay true to that.
Yes. Yeah. How does it make one feel? Yeah.
Right. Good acts. And also, so the secondary gain that you get from those acts, also one needs to understand how
Mhm.
that makes one feel. I think for most rational individuals, most people suffering from neurosis, I think there is an understanding, a deep sense of satisfaction or disquiet one gets with certain actions and the repercussions of those actions,
Mhm.
and you can steer yourself in the right direction. At least they show this in movies and cartoons all the time. We have a devil on one side and an angel on the other side, and it's kind of they're having conversations. I think people have that, and as a matter of fact, people have more than just one devil and one angel. You have all sorts of different personalities, and you're drawn towards one or the other. And these are all just versions of you telling you do it, don't do it. Um, and yes, if you're younger and you're ignorant, one is more likely to stray towards things and try it. I mean, that's the time you get to try. I mean, these extremes.
right?
Aha,
Yeah,
that's a great point.
yeah,
The devil and the angel are the actual extremes of this. You got to find
yeah.
you, and your head is in the middle, right?
That's
And
exactly it. Yes, yeah,
yeah, maybe that's what this comes from. Maybe you find a lot of things you can trace back to Aristotle and Plato,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're being
Which,
pulled in these two extremes. You got to find the middle ground.
yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm sure yeah, that is.
Should
I've
put that
never
on a
thought of
t-shirt
that way,
somewhere.
but that's very much it. Um, and just recently, I just heard how that there's a benefit to talking to yourself,
Yeah, that's
and
called
and
introspection.
not just internally, but actually talking to yourself, and that might be weighing out the different, the devil on
Oh,
one side, the angel on the other, and maybe you're coming out somewhere in the middle. But if you're actually asking yourself out loud, like, Jeremy, am I really doing this right now? But you know that it might not be the right action that you're about to
yeah,
take.
yeah.
And by asking yourself out loud, it might actually stop you from taking that action.
Oh boy, intuition has saved me so many times when I was younger from doing stupid things that I shouldn't be doing,
Yeah.
finding myself in situations I shouldn't have found myself.
Uh-huh.
Um, and but I tell you, doing the right thing may be painful in the moment, but it is always better in the long run.
That's right.
And therein lies what you were trying to say, that intuition part, right? Which takes you away from doing the wrong thing. The doing the wrong thing feels good in the moment, but boy, those things come to bite you. And then pulling yourself out of that is the way to go. And like, even you don't like what's the word they use, right? These are acts that you do that lead to bigger acts, and so they are like gateway gateway actions,
Right.
gateway drugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are all things that you do to kind of get there. One needs to stay away from that, at
Yeah.
least early on, in one's life. You're better off staying away from things that could lead you down the dark path uh early on. It's better to just abstain from those things and then try it on later.
Yeah. Which is fascinating because you think about kids in pure pressure and the things that I see a lot of in work with folks who are trying to combat school bullying,
Oh yeah.
and to think like if you use that as kind of the extremes. I mean, there are probably kids there who recognize that this is bad and are doing it anyways. There are ones who recognize it's bad and choosing not to say anything because they don't want whatever
Yeah.
repercussions. And then there are the ones who just know this
Right.
isn't right and I'm going to do something about it and stand up for that person. And that is the hardest thing as a child
It's extremely difficult.
to have to come to terms with of, oh, am I actually going to put myself out there and risk
Yeah.
potential social suicide
Yeah.
by standing up for the kid who's getting bullied?
Yeah.
And so like at such a young age, we're actually almost like positioned to be making the wrong choices because of the peer pressure around us.
Yeah.
Fear of how the mass will respond should I go against it.
Yeah. Yeah, I see your point, and so there's a bit of nuance there too, right? Because sometimes the bully is the one who is undergoing some sort of psychological trauma,
Yeah.
and they are meeting it out, and that's well known. But we are talking about the silent masses, the others who are around, right? And so one would like to put themselves in the shoe of the aggressor or the victim, but what about the silent spectator? Most of us in life are in the silent spectator space, and we
That's
are
right.
all making a choice. Even to stay quiet is a choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so at least not participating in the bullying, right? Is a choice. And there's a lot of intuition there. The kids who do it know most of them would say that, yeah, what they did was not right. They knew they were hurting the other person.
Yeah.
And so that's a great easy example. But even as adults, man, we see it all the time. We see it all the time. We find ourselves in all these situations too. Should you say something, not say something? At least, again, going back to what Aristotle says, forget about being a virtuous agent. At least don't be a jackass. Like, don't be a bad neighbor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All right, so
And that's a great place to start, right?
yeah,
Don't be a jackass. You can
just don't
start
be a
there
jackass.
and move and work your way up. Yeah.
That's right. Then we can figure it out. Um, so, uh, so then he goes into these. So now, so once you've done that, you're not a jackass anymore. Now you want to get yourself to be a better human being. What do you do? And so now he talks about all of these excesses and and deficiencies and the mean in between. The mean is where virtue lies, and these virtues, the Aristotelian virtues, far outnumber the Hellenistic virtues, the cardinal virtues, the virtues that when you distill everything down to, it comes down to justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom. But he talks about all these other states of virtue, and then this does become quite a laborious task down the line, Jeremy, when he goes into each of these in further detail. You know, but now this he just gives you a prelude. So, what do you think about those? So he starts um, with the most important one here. The two most important ones. He starts off with the cardinal ones: courage and temperance.
Right.
So, do you want to take it from here, because this is some nice juicy stuff here?
Yeah. So we're talking about courage. Let's use courage to start with, right?
Yeah, let's do
And
that.
what the where one would fall on the mean in courage. So what does courage look like if it's deficient, and what does it look like if it's in excess?
Correct.
And what are the outcomes, right? And
Right.
so let's say so courage, and the bullying example is great there, right? But courage there, falling short would be not saying anything at all.
Yeah. And not just not saying it, like, there could be indifference, but not saying it because one is fearful of repercussion. That's
Right.
cowardice. Too
That's
much fear,
cowardice. Right.
right? Too much
Right.
fear, inaction due to fear, having
Mhm.
a sense of fear, which is more than what it should be.
That's right. Yeah.
The
Yeah. It's out of
opposite of,
fear.
right.
Yeah. Right. Good. So access and too much is that could be reckless,
Yeah. Reckless,
right?
rash, reckless. Yeah.
Rash. Yeah. Um, what else? Yeah. I mean, those are the two words that come to mind for me.
Yep. Those are the ones he
Yeah.
chooses as well. When you look
Yeah.
at recklessness or rash, um, there it is action without an understanding of the fear. There is the one is supposed to have some fear, but you have a subnor almost an absence of understanding the fear that exists.
Yeah.
And then courage is then the mean, and what it is having the right amount of fear, but doing the right action, doing the right thing despite having the fear, right? Because if you have too much fear, then you cannot act, and that's cowardice. If you have
Mhm.
no fear and you're doing actions, that's recklessness, and then courage happens to be in the middle. So that's courage, and then um, and so this is there's also a confidence aspect to it, right? A rash person is usually overconfident, right?
Right.
Overconfidence means that one doesn't have an understanding of the risk,
Yeah.
right? So being confident means one understands the risk, but one has practiced, one has been there. And most of these actions, like courage, doesn't just happen in actions that one hasn't partaken in. So you have to partake in that action before, learn from it. You'll be initially fearful of the action, and then over time with practice, you get more. You develop courage. Courage takes time.
Right. Courage takes time. That's right. Yeah. And confidence is really trusting in yourself.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And when you say trust in oneself to do what? To not do the wrong thing.
Right.
And because you're fearful of the wrong thing, that's why you don't want to do it. Right?
Right.
Um, so that's beautiful. I like what you said. It's trusting oneself. And so then the second one is with regard to pleasures, right? That is where, when it comes to pleasure and pain, right? The mean is temperance. Says
Right.
the excess is self-indulgent. That's usually where we find most of us being drawn to. Too much of good food, too much of good time, too much of alcohol, too much of whatever, right? Too much of that's where self-indulgence comes. Too much of luxury. Temperance is a moderation of that. Not too much, not too little. You don't want to abstain. Because if you abstain and you don't participate in anything, then you're more like an insensible kind of a person. Now, hard to find humans like that. You really have to be, someone who by choice, chooses not to participate in anything luxurious. We don't find that. Uh, it could be privation for other gains, secondary gains, like I don't know, religious reasons or whatever, right? But usually you don't find them.
But even then,
Um,
then they're probably filling that with something else.
with something else,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, 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 and it could be misguided things to reasons. The secondary gain could be if you you do this, then you get some eternal happiness, and if you don't do it, you get sin or something, things like that. um, but nonetheless, so temperance is the midpoint between the self-indulgent behavior and then this insensate person, and you got to be somewhere in the middle. That means you participate in whatever they're being offered to you. Like the good example is that there's you're at a party, and a very tasty side dish that's being passed around, and you're not constantly going toward the dish and hoping the dish comes to you, and you don't take too much into your plate when that thing is in. So if it comes to you, great, you take your a fair share, you just eat a little bit and pass it along. And if it comes to you and it is over by the time it gets to you, you don't get like disgruntled and leave. So
Right.
that's temperance.
Right.
You participate but don't go crazy. Now, then he talks about money. He says when it comes to giving and taking money, there are two ways of doing this. There is small sums and large sums. If it is large sums of money, that means you are this deals probably with you know contributing to a bigger cause, like your not for profits, for example, and things like that. So you're a liberal person. You have liberality. Um, and these are all just words now. If you do too much of that, you're a prodigal person. It's prodigality and things like that, and that's probably in the why would someone do too much of giving away money? There could be many reasons for it. There's usually for secondary gain, notoriety, things like that. It could also be for things that are actually not of consequence, not of moral consequence. Like a lot of people want their names on buildings and all sorts of stuff, and
Sure.
so
Oh yeah.
that's that's probably
Yeah.
prodigality. And then there's meanness, where you have the wealth, like but you hold on to it, like Scrooge, right? So Scrooge is a mean guy, a meanness in a way. And liberality is somewhere you're in the middle, where you have the wealth, you're ready to put it into good use, but you also understand the fact that you shouldn't waste it. So you have a little bit of both. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's. I mean, I agree with that. I was thinking of different examples, and I think that there's a lot of secondary gain
Mm,
with those who have wealth and um, choose to donate a lot, um, but but at the same time, like I wonder, like the Gates Foundation set up to do good in the world, right? I mean, I truly believe that. That there was good intention there, but I'm also positive that there was a great tax break by setting up a
exactly. Yeah.
foundation like that. And I'm witness to someone with billions of dollars who donates all the time and is very much setting up healthcare networks around the world, like doing great things. But there's a lot of secondary gain there. I mean, it's a tax play,
Yeah.
right? So when you're at that level, though, the question is like how do you what they are doing might be generosity. Maybe it actually is somewhere in the mean because that secondary gain. I don't know if you can get away from that, like unless you're just giving it all up, right? I mean, and again,
Yeah.
and then we get into the individual differences. Like that person, these people are well intended in terms of what they want to do, but if it's without secondary gain, then how could you possibly ever move forward?
Yeah.
Well, I have this $1 billion. I'm not going to give away the entire billion, but I'm going to, donate 10% of what I make every year or 20% because I don't need $1 billion to live off of. So why don't I donate half of it? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you
I
think?
don't know. I I struggle with this one because we find ourselves in the extremes very quickly. Like, Gates Foundation, everybody knows about. But, the chance that anybody is going to turn into Bill Gates, I mean, the odds are 7 billion to 1, right? Or to 7, I guess. I mean, there's 7 the richest people in the world. He's in that. So, it's almost virtually impossible for that to happen. And one doesn't become Bill Gates without completely straying from a certain path. Like, you don't get there. There's the choices that one has to make.
Yes.
Now, so again, let's not, I don't know if billionaire in and of itself is an excess, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it gets even harder. Beyond a certain point, it gets even harder to participate in the common good. I think there's a certain amount of money beyond which it gets even harder to do that. And I think happiness drops off significantly as well beyond a certain point. These men are probably miserable. And unfortunate. It's like a curse. It's like Midas's touch kind of thing. Everything you touch and everybody you come across, everybody wants you for your money. There's really nothing else that you get. No one sees you as a person. So that's a problem. But if you look at everybody else, I think there is um, the ability to participate with liberality if one has met all their needs, some of their wants, and now understands that their money can be put to good use in order to be a virtuous agent. You see, it's not necessarily billions of dollars. It's not about curing malaria. It is more about using your money to get on the path.
Yeah. Intentionality, being thoughtful about
Absolutely.
what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And yeah,
Knowledge, choice, secondary gain,
yeah,
consistency,
yeah.
right? The
That's
same
right.
virtuous agent.
Yeah.
If you're using your money doing that, right? I think that's what that means.
Yeah.
But if you have made $1 billion, unfortunately, my friend, like that, you have strayed that path. You have done many of those things, those certain actions and passions that are wrong. You've already performed them. That's how you got there. There's no way to make $1 billion without having tipped the scales completely towards the dark
Yes.
side. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that.
Yeah.
Well, so that is liberality, and then there is in personal interactions, there's being magnanimous, and that is with small sums of money, with friends
Mhm.
and things like that. Now, one could be where is the yeah so one could be somebody who's magnanimous, um or magnificence, I guess, is what he calls it. Sorry, magnificence or magnanimous, magnificence. And you could see that in people. You are paying small checks, or you throw you help your neighbors out or whatever. It's just small sums of money. Whenever you spend tastefully. When you're out in a party, you're not really showing off. I mean, this is not buying bottles of Dom Perignon, in a club for everybody. That's stupid things like that. Or making it rain, as they say, all this nonsense. You're not doing that. And if you do that, that means it's tasteless vulgarity. And then you could be really cheap. You don't want to be cheap either. Whenever you are out with somebody, you're saying, hopefully that guy takes the check,
Right.
or whatever, things like that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You see
Yeah.
that.
Good examples. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so magnificence. You want to have magnificence in this. But again, both of these things, liberality and magnificence, both of those things are predicated on one having a certain amount of pocket change to be able to do that.
Hmm.
And and that's why I feel like that's why this doesn't have the same level of what should I say? It's not elevated to the same level as courage and temperance. One can be impecunious, poor, and but have courage and temperance. But one cannot have magnificence or liberality if one doesn't have money. You see what I mean? I don't think money really gets you on the path of happiness. I think one can be courageous, temperate, just, and not be wealthy. So
Hmm.
that's why it's not in the cardinal virtues. And then he talks about honor and dishonor, right? I guess one needs to have enough um, predicate predilection for honor, and that's proper pride. If you think too much of yourself, it's empty vanity. And if you are just have no honor about yourself, I think this is more about self respect, right? You have undue humility. Uh, yeah, what do you think about that? I think this one is a little bit challenging because we live in a world. I think a lot of this has got to do with religiosity. It says, oh, one should have no pride, and so we are usually we all certain generations tend towards humility a lot. I don't know what you think about that.
Um, I think humility comes with wisdom and age.
Mm,
Hopefully, um, but pride is something that, and I don't know. I think that, I mean, it's an interesting thought to say, all right, if you're doing these good acts and you're on this path, could you, we're saying you're going to feel good from doing these acts over and over again, and that'll accumulate over, in terms of living a good life. Can you not then have pride in that you've done that? Uh,
right.
yeah,
I mean,
the
self-respect, right? If you
yeah,
change pride to self-respect,
yeah,
right? Shouldn't you have some self-respect, man? If you're walking this path, it's hard. You know, it's hard.
yeah,
It's so easy to stray off the path
yeah.
to be a jackass.
Right.
I think um the side where you really think too much of yourself, your vanity,
Right,
that's a problem.
right, right.
You
That's an extreme for sure.
that's
Yeah,
an extreme, and I think we're more likely to be on the vanity side of this than on the other side of it.
yeah,
You
yeah.
see what I mean? Oh man, I'm a cardiologist kind of vanity.
Right, right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm a CEO kind of vanity. And I
mhm,
think that is a problem, or, several $100 million vanity.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think that people get, I mean, titles can hold up a lot of us, thinking, well, that's where I need to go. That's where I need to get to. And now I have it, and I'm, and then it gets into power and hierarchy, and none of that matters. It's all it's all made up. I mean, it exists. It truly exists,
Absolutely.
but it's all in existence. It's a figment of what we create that doesn't actually matter at the end of the day. It's Anish and Jeremy talking here together. It doesn't matter what your title is or what my title is or what we're doing, you know, what my level is at this organization. Like what that's not so
The right path or the path to happiness existed way before CEOs existed.
right.
So CEOs is not the way to get on the right path. So, but again, being on the path leads to a sense of self-satisfaction, self-respect, and one should be able to carry that forward. One should not also be too humble when it comes to that, um, because that can also be annoying, especially
Yeah,
especially if you feel that you're on the right thing, but you just don't express it.
right.
But now, whatever be the reason for not doing so, I don't know what that reason would be. But if you're on the right path, man, yeah, I mean, talk about it. Have proper pride. Have
Yeah.
proper self-respect.
And
Um,
again, we're talking about the mean here. We're saying somewhere in the middle, somewhere around there, right? We're
absolutely.
trying to avoid those extremes.
And if you want to deviate towards one of the extremes a little bit, it'll probably be more to the humble side than to the vanity side.
Right, right.
Yeah. You don't want to wear a t-shirt that says you've arrived and then pop bottles in a club. Uh, All right. Then he talks about, yeah, ambition. So the middle place are ambitious people, and then there are people who are unambitious, but there is no real the person who's too ambitious, and there's no real term for that. But we know what he means. We've all been there, um, right? I mean, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
yeah. Well, I think no, people can lack direction, or passion, um, or an innate desire to do something. And it's interesting the concept of ambition in this, the challenge of that. I mean, the word ambitious could
Yeah.
easily find you in one end of this extreme, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lack of, or are you too ambitious? And then what does that look like in our world? I mean, too ambitious could be, a workaholic. It could be leaving, a whole bunch of dead bodies behind you, a bull in a china shop, getting your way. I'm going to get that promotion and I'll throw anyone under the bus that I need to get there, right?
Yeah.
And we've all seen that, right? I mean, cutthroat
Yeah.
cultures, the big five consulting firms dropping, cutting the bottom 10% every year. And it's just an
Yeah.
expectation.
Yeah.
These are things that people go in there highly ambitious and maybe to a fault. So where is that then that middle ground for you?
Yeah.
What do you think? Where's the middle ground for ambition?
It's hard. I think the this is not about an ambition and isolation,
Mhm.
right? Having the desire to walk the path, is ambition.
Yeah.
There's an ambition to walk the path. And if one is trying to walk the path, and that's the ambition one has, that has to be the right ambition. Now, yes, you can stray toward being too ambitious in walking the path,
Mhm.
but I think that would be the right direction to go in, as long as you're walking the path, right? As opposed to being unambitious. I think most of us, when it comes to walking the path, find ourselves unambitious to do so.
Right. Yes. Yeah. What do you think about the idea of like setting, it's the ambition being something like I'm going to set goals for myself to walk the path, and that's meaningful intention.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be the what would set you to create those goals would be the ambition to do so,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And as you do so, you develop self-respect, and that's proper pride. So it comes from that action. Yeah,
That's good.
that's nice. Yeah, I like that. Um, correct. Yeah. Then he talks about moods or passions. So then he goes to anger, which is an easy one. We've all been there, right?
Right.
There's an excess and a deficiency and a mean. So he says the intermediate person is good tempered. Now, good tempered in our sense is somebody who doesn't get angry. Actually, in a society, we have decided that anger just doesn't work. Like, you just cannot get angry. Now, I think we discussed this where one doesn't get to choose the emotion. The emotion comes from a part of the brain that one really doesn't have control over.
Right.
Feeling angry, feeling irritated, feeling sad. It's like the standing in the line and getting pushed out of the line.
Mhm.
And it turns out that when you get pushed out, you're immediately angry, irritated, or whatever. But if you don't swing. That swinging is acting on the anger. If you are a good tempered person, you would feel the irritation. You'll turn back and you look and see, oh, it was the old person who stumbled and bumped into me. So I'm not going to take a swipe at it. As a matter of fact, I might help this person up,
Right.
right? But if you are an irascible sort of guy, like you get pushed out of the line and you are automatically just blind with rage, you're swinging your hands and you're saying bad things, you're being a jackass. Um, and then the deficiency of this is somebody who never takes to anger, which I don't know if personally. I think everybody has a tipping point, but I think there's a certain benefit to anger or irritation. One must feel it in certain situations. And I think anger is a tool that one could use. Obviously, one shouldn't be irascible, but one shouldn't let everything just, brush it off, kind of, and I don't know if I don't know if it's a choice. I don't think, I think you just have the tendency. I don't know. What do you think?
I think we suppress a lot of our emotions,
Uh,
and I think that anger is one of the main ones that many of us suppress. And I think that obviously it's used, when we think of anger, we're seeing that being used in wrong ways. But I think a healthy individual owns their feelings.
Mm,
If I'm angry, I need to understand that I'm angry right now, and I have a right to be angry. Something made me angry. Am I okay?
yeah.
Like I should be able
Yeah.
to be angry. It's how do I respond? It's these other it's that self control. It's being a temperate person, being like,
Yeah.
I'm angry right now. I'm not going to blow up at you about it, but I'm not okay right now. I'm not happy about this. And so how do you respond? And that's so I think to your point, like emotions, we're going to have them and we
Yeah.
should have them and we shouldn't suppress them. The one who suppresses it's the one who ends up going postal someday. So it's right. I mean, that's we need to be one. We need to be in touch with our emotions, and that those are our emotions. By the way, like Anish, if I interacted with you and something you did made me angry, I that's my emotion. That's my reaction. But it's not necessarily for you to own. I mean, there's an action there, there's a behavior. How that behavior impacted me, how I choose to respond though, is also my choice.
Yeah. Tell me more. So, what would be the response, and how would that make you, how would that improve your chances of walking the path?
Yeah. Identifying that I'm angry, right? So
Yeah.
there's a piece here that one says, first off, it's about that self awareness to understand that I'm angry. And actually, a great concept to come into all this is emotional intelligence, right? I understand my emotions. I understand that you have your own emotions. I understand what our what the relationships are, and I can read the room. I can read social cues. I can understand too that like maybe there are visceral responses we have when we're in a heated moment, right? And so like
Right.
I can see right now Anish is angry. What am I
Yeah.
going to do? How am I going to choose to respond in that scenario? So I think that there's a lot to um it's about self-regulation to start. I mean awareness and regulation, and then to be on the path of saying the right thing to do potentially is to share where you're at in a way that isn't isn't accusatory. It's Anish, when you do this, this is how I feel. This is
Yeah.
what it made me feel when you just said that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a in organizations, that's a feedback tool, right? I mean, it's a common feedback tool that's being taught by, there's a model there. But when we're talking about just engagement and interacting with people, it's first understanding how did this impact me? How am I feeling right now? And then sharing that. But it's all about this is how I'm impacted by your actions because I don't know what you intended from your actions. I can only make assumptions.
Yeah. 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 That is, so the anger is a tool if you use it to your benefit. That means, like what you said, if one gets angry, it's very easy to know when one is angry or not.
Mm-hmm.
Then one needs to break it down. Obviously, lashing out and seeing red and being irate is not a good response. That is you have to be really down on that the vertical development to be in that state, right?
Right.
That's being a jackass. That you shouldn't do. Now, everything else, though, like as you described, is figuring out what happened and learning from that and making a better tomorrow, right? Based on why you felt a certain way. Just suppressing it and saying, I shouldn't feel this way is not the right thing to do. That is being irascible. That is the deficiency of this problem. If you felt anger, you know it's justified. You got to figure out now, as long as you were a calm person, you're temperate, like you said, and you didn't lash out. Now figure out why and then fix it and make the world a better place tomorrow.
Right.
Channel that anger,
That's
channel
right.
the anger, find the solution. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, I think so. And it's not just about me, right? It's if we're doing this right, if we're using it
Yeah.
correctly, potentially we're both benefiting from the
Correct.
outcome.
Correct. Correct. And it can all the same thing could apply to a larger body, like your community, the political environment, whatever, right? You could
Yes.
feeling anger and then working in that direction gets you somewhere. Anger is a tool for that reason. That's great. I love that. I love that. So then he talks about truth, and so the person who speaks the truth. And now this is not about you know it's the does this make me look does this dress make me look fat, that kind of, there are times you don't want to be the kind of person who exaggerates every time, I guess, or you all I'm going to say whatever is on my mind,
Right.
or whatever I believe is the truth. I'm going to say yes, you look fat in this dress, as opposed to you got to judge the situation, man, and then be tactful about that.
Uh,
It's not about the veracity of it. It's more about the circumstances around it. So you could be a truthful person. You could be somebody who is boastful, and then I think this is more to do with oneself as well. One could be what's called mock modest, or somebody who would say things that is untrue about them or about the other person. I don't know how much that happens, but I find people very binary about truth and lies, which it's all opinion in a way. And I think the circumstances matter,
yes.
right? There's a serial killer standing outside. I think these are all experiments. There's a serial killer standing outside your door, and he has a knife in his hand, and he asks you, he's chasing somebody, and that person runs into your house, and you close the door, and this person's outside the door knocking, saying, "Is this person in your house?" There are all these psychological experiments, the philosophical experiments about, should you say something, should you intervene, it's all ridiculousness in my mind. Obviously, don't open the door, man. Call the cops.
Right. Right.
um, okay, with regard to pleasantness in giving amusement, this is someone who's ready-witted, who has a disposition for ready wit. And I think this is important too, because you could be someone who is a buffoon, or you could be someone who's boorish, or you could be somebody who has ready wit. And I think it goes a little bit more than just that, because one could be somebody who is you can use wit as a weapon, and you could a lot of bullying comes from that.
Hmm.
uh or you could be somebody who is very like a boorish person who just there's no smiling, there's no laughing. You've been around people like that. I've seen
Yeah.
people like that too. They're too serious,
Right.
right? And a lot of people mistake stoicism for that. Like, no, stoicism is actually a lot of ready wit. You know, so in Sparta, the term laconic comes from Laconia, which is Sparta,
Oh.
and laconic is somebody who actually doesn't say much. Well, it actually doesn't necessarily mean laconic in the sense that someone doesn't say much. They're stoic. That's these are all quote unquote stoic. These are all misrepresentations of the word. In Sparta, the whole thing was about coming up with a one liner. It's like, like it's one of those yo mama jokes. It's like it's a one liner,
Uh,
and they would. It was all about that. They would think a lot before they would say it, because they wanted to say something in as few words they can. It would have the punch in it. Like they'd be all just one liners. So it is ready wit. It's just about right, as opposed to being a buffoon where you don't think about anybody else's feelings and you keep saying things and whatever.
mhm, mhm.
Or somebody who's boorish. What do you think?
Yeah, I think earlier it's actually reflecting on wit, and earlier in my career I think I used sarcasm a lot
Yeah, sarcasm.
in group meetings, um, to lighten the mood.
Uh,
Um, then over the years I've worked with different groups where some leaders are using it all the time with their teams, and I've come to start to question that might actually not be all that helpful. Like it might even be a
yeah.
defense mechanism or deflecting. instead of having some of the tougher conversations that they need to have, they're using this. And I think it, in some ways, I think there's, again, within moderation, it works. And then, but if you're overusing it,
Yeah.
I think it's because you're probably avoiding something else.
Yeah, it's a defense mechanism. I see what you
Yeah.
mean. The ready wit, especially when it comes to laconic and Sparta, the movie 300 has a few of those lines. So
Uh-huh.
the Xerxes tells them, or I think it's not Xerxes, it is one of the generals or somebody tells the Spartans when they're lined up at the hot gates and says that we you're 300, we have 10,000. Our arrows will blot out the sun, and so then um, the reply that the Spartans give is, then we'll fight in the shade.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like that.
yeah, yeah,
So these are the kind of one-liners. But yeah, so ready wit. But I get your point. Sarcasm actually is cool. A lot of people use sarcasm as a way to diffuse tension, and but that's more of a defense mechanism.
yeah,
I get your
yeah,
point, and not always taken well. Um, yeah. So these were all. And then there are other ones like there's one in which you could be friendly or you could be an obsequious kind of person, or a flatterer. So the difference between someone who's friendly is they're appropriately friendly. Obsequious person, um, they are just obsequious. They have no end in sight. They're just happy to everybody. They're just always you know saying good things about someone, even though that person may not necessarily be true, or they're always just bowing down to people. They really don't have that much of self-respect. There's no aim for them to do that. Flattery, though, a flatterer is someone who does it because there's an aim in sight. Like you're
sure. Okay.
you're saying these things because you want something in return. Um, yeah, those are. Then there is. Oh yeah, this is a cool one. So then, righteous indignation is the mean between envy and spite. I think this is a cool one.
Yeah,
I
so
feel
say that again.
righteous indignation is the mean between envy and spite. Now, I don't know if spite is the right word or not, but I do get envy though. Envy it was a tough one for me. It took me a long time, and even now, like I find myself in situations where I could find myself being envious of somebody, and it's brief now. It's much better,
Hmm.
but envy has always been. I think it's true for all humans. I don't think I'm alone in this, but uh, let me be the first to admit that I've been envious of people. But envy, I think the difference between righteous indignation and envy is that in righteous indignation, um, if one someone that achieves something that is not by the right means, or does something that is not in line of virtue, is conventionally good but doesn't align with virtue, or achieves merit through actions that are not virtuous, one could actually feel indignation,
Mm.
saying, this is not right, correct? So that is righteous indignation. Envy is no matter what. If that person is, like being envious of Nelson Mandela or being envious of Mahatma Gandhi, you see what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you just cannot see the good. You just cannot see the good thing in there. You don't know this. This is terrible. This person should not have gotten these accolades, no matter what. Like terrible. Why it should have been me.
right,
You
right.
know, it should have been me leading. The fight for independence or something like that. So righteous indignation is the mean between envy and spite. And I think a spiteful person is someone who, which is strange. I don't know. I'm sure there are people like this outside, but so if someone has achieved something using terrible means, um, instead of being instead of having indignation towards that, you actually rejoice in it. I, strange. Like
Yeah.
It's like maybe the school shooter who gets whose face is on television, and there's somebody going, look, this person's getting accolades for it, or rejoicing in the fact that this person ended up getting some fame or notoriety because of it. I'm sure terrorists think that way.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
That's
I
a
mean, what do
yeah.
you think?
No, I think that's a good example to actually try to figure out what are we talking about with spite. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, actually getting joy or
yeah,
accolades for encouraging even
terrible acts.
acts. Yeah.
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 Uh, and I think you see that a lot nowadays. Like, I think social media has also given rise to some stuff like this, right? Like, there's a lot of what is that? There's a form of argument that you show up, and there is no proprietary. In the past, these these debates would be moderated, and there would be there'd be the appropriate response. There are certain things that you wouldn't say or do, and now that proprietary is gone,
That's
and
gone.
now
Yeah.
you're an insult comic. Like if you make the other person be terrible, the crowd rejoices, and you're like, you're terrible at it. You're not being a nice person, but the crowd is rejoicing, and I think that's kind of spite. I feel
Yeah. Okay.
you all want to be the person who could do that,
Hmm.
you know, but you don't want to. It's a bad act, but you still rejoice in it, and
Right.
I don't know. It's weird. I find spite to be weird.
Yeah.
So then I think we need to. Boy, this took longer than we thought, man. How many we're 1.5 hours into this. Boy, I think we can round this out. So this the thing here is that one has to know. So if one wants to walk the right path, there are two problems with the excesses and the mean. One problem is related to the thing in and of itself. What I mean is that there are some things, some extremes that are more related to the mean than other extremes. The good example would be when it comes to courage. Uh, being cowardly is an extreme that one can really identify with, and it's far away from the mean of having courage, as opposed to being reckless. Reckless is a little bit closer to courage than cowardliness is. You rather be on the reckless side or the rash side than be on the cowardly side. This is what I'm trying to say, right?
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
got something to do with courage in and of itself. But the second thing is the individual's tendencies or nature. Some people tend to be reckless. Some
Right.
people tend to be cowardly. And so, in order to walk the path, one has to understand the nature of the thing itself and one's own nature.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah.
And a lot of that introspection has to be done before one starts walking down the path. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think I wrote my notes, self-awareness, right?
Yeah,
And that you really have to know where you are and even what gravitates you towards one or the other, right?
absolutely.
Are you do you have a tendency to want to lean towards the reckless? And why? Um, and asking yourself why helps get you potentially closer to the mean in either direction. Um, yeah.
Asking yourself why gets you started,
Yes.
you know, and then you actually have to take the steps away.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
I get your point. Well begun is half done, but you have to ask yourself, figure out who you are, and you have to be okay. You have to be honest with yourself. If one is cowardly, you you don't have to put it on a t-shirt, but you have to tell yourself that's the case, and then start now understanding that, and then start making yourself kind of walk toward the other direction, right? So I completely
Sure.
agree with you. So the path toward virtue starts with avoiding the extreme most contrary to the virtue, right?
Hmm.
Like cowardliness or self-indulgence when it comes to temperance. Like most of us are self-indulgent, and most of us are cowards. So we and it doesn't upon what other, but just to ask yourself where you are, and you start with avoiding the extreme. So you avoid cowardliness, avoid self-indulgence, right? Start there, um, and then um, and also those two things like self-indulgence and cowardliness are also just by the nature of courage and the nature of temperance is such that most people are on the cowardly side of this, most people are on the self-indulgent side of it. So understanding the extreme and then understanding your own tendencies and then moving completely away, start there. And what happens is as you start walking the path towards going the other way, you will find yourself crossing the mean at some point.
Right. Yeah.
If you keep going that direction, most people are like, "Oh my gosh, like what if I end up on the other side?" Well, it's not going to happen. Again,
Right.
that it's too much of a chasm.
Yeah.
You find yourself closer and closer to the right path, and so you find
Yeah.
yourself, courageous acts. You got to drag yourself away from pleasure. So
Today I was a coward. Tomorrow I'm reckless. Yeah.
it's not going to happen. That's not what usually happens. You find yourself. So, what do you think about that?
So I think it's I think those are wise words and great ways to think about. It is. It's these steps, right?
Right,
It's acknowledge where you are, and then what can I do? And they were talking about even the idea of intentional, like the ambition, and being having goals in mind or ideas in mind of this is what I'm going to try, and
right,
and you have to start with one act
right.
and then another act and then
That's right.
in muscle memory over time this becomes more natural. You don't actually have to think about it, but in order to do this you actually have to be thoughtful, intentional about doing it. You have to know that this is the path I want to be on, and
That,
to start there. Yeah.
the qualifiers. You got to have knowledge. You got to choose to do it. No secondary gain, and you got to do it consistently, right? And I think you had said this: exercising your virtue muscle,
That's right.
right?
Yes.
That's what you're doing, and
Yeah.
that it takes time before the muscle builds. You got to keep doing it, and so that's walking the path. Very well said. And so things like simple example would be this is not a cardinal virtue, but the magnanimity.
Mhm.
And pick up the check. You
Right.
know, simple things like that.
Yeah.
Don't in or one doesn't have to listen to this and say, well, I want to do what Jeremy did and I want to be on the board of a not-for-profit. Well, start somewhere else. Go to the food pantry.
Right.
Start there. Do that once every month. Then do that once every weekend. Do find some things that you could participate in, and then slowly you start noticing that you're taking bigger and bigger and bigger steps. You're getting more liberal. You're getting magnificent. Then you find yourself that some of these things now require you to step out of your comfort zone. So now you're not as self-indulgent, and then some of these things require you to actually take a step against or stand against something. So you're courageous, you're not cowardly. So you can build on these things. That's a
Yeah.
great point. So I just have these four steps that I got. Step one is guard against pleasure. What I meant to say by that is if, guard against a thing that comes easy to you. Guard against pleasure. Step two, practice going toward the other extreme. And then while you're doing that, you're going to come upon this is going to be hard. If you're going to have pain because you've chosen against pleasure and you are doing things that are not your nature, you're going to come upon things are going to happen. And you're going to stumble and you're going to get off the path and you're going to find yourself back on the path again. And each time you do that, you're getting on the path, getting off the path, you're getting angry, irritated, confused, all of that. You're learning. And that's where you get practical wisdom. And as you gain practical wisdom, you find more opportunities to be on the path.
Yeah.
So, going back to the circular logic of Aristotle, like what is right action? It is action that the virtuous man would choose. Who is a virtuous man? The virtuous man does right action.
Right.
Well, if you walk now in these four steps, you realize first you guard against pleasure, right? Then you start practicing things that are against your nature, but are taking you away from the extreme that you are on, right? And
Mhm.
as you're doing it, you're gaining the practical wisdom. You're going from somebody who's doing the right action. to becoming somebody who understands the right action,
Right. Mm.
becoming somebody who is then, in fact, a practically wise person. And this takes your lifetime. The other thing to realize about this is, again, this is no destination. This is a journey. If
Yeah.
you're going to be on the planet for 7 or 8 decades, you don't want to get this done in your 20s or your 30s. So what are you going to do for the rest of your time, man?
Right.
You cannot do it. So it takes you in your 40s to even understand that these things are matter. And
Right.
then it takes you another 30, 40, 50 years to keep walking. And then when you're in your 70s, you find yourself a wise man, right? Now,
Hopefully.
yeah, hopefully. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Right. But I'm saying that, and if you ask what does the wise man do? Well, they do the same actions that the 40-year-old person did.
Right.
But just that now it's easier to do them, and you do bigger and bigger of those tasks. You see? So
Yeah.
the right action leads you to become the virtuous man. The virtuous man does the right actions, but there is a process along the way,
Yeah.
right? And then and with each step you're getting closer and closer to the mean. The If you do this correctly, in your seventh decade, you're closer to the mean than you're in the fourth decade.
Right. Good.
Therein ends book 2 of the Nicomachean
All
Ethics.
right.
Thanks, Jeremy.
All right. Thanks, Anish.